They sold me to the most feared man in Boston, as if I were an old debt, a worthless object, a punishment my own family wanted to watch me suffer. I walked into Costantino Saviano's mansion expecting violence, humiliation, and fear. But the monster everyone swore they knew gave me shelter, silence, and a protection I had never received. The problem is that the harder he tried to keep me at a distance, the more I understood that I was running from myself too. And when his enemies discovered I was his weakness, he had to choose: push me away to try to save me, or claim me in front of everyone and turn my name into war. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1. The Debt Has a Woman's Name. The Manzoni living room smelled of stale cigarettes and burnt sugar, and I knew, even before Solange opened her mouth, that the reason for the meeting was me. I was sitting on the edge of the couch with the sewing box in my lap, my hands running along the hem of my gray dress, as if that hem were the only thing still holding me to the floor. The stitching was perfect. I had checked it 3 times that morning. I checked it again because, when my hand stopped, something inside my chest threatened to give way. Solange paced back and forth between the coffee table and the window, her robe tied any which way over her nightgown, her lipstick smeared at the corner of her mouth. She was a woman who was aging badly and who blamed the world for it. She smelled of cheap whiskey and expensive perfume bought on sale. Fernanda, my older half-sister, leaned against the doorframe with her arms crossed, watching like someone who's seen a movie and already knows the ending. Sonia, the youngest, pretended to read a book. I saw her hands trembling on the page. "Bibiana," Solange said, and her voice scraped like a nail on glass. "Get up." I stood up, legs steady, chin in place. I learned early that if I cried, she swallowed me whole. If I stayed quiet, she choked. "You know the house is mortgaged," she went on, without looking at me. She looked at the wall. "You know I owe money. I know. You don't know to whom." I felt a shiver crawl up the back of my neck. I looked at Fernanda. She smiled crookedly. Sonia lifted her face, and then lowered it again. "Costantino Saviano," Solange said. The name hung in the air like a knife forgotten on the clothesline. I had learned early what that name meant. The streets of the South End whispered it. The shops paid in silence. When a man disappeared near the docks, no one asked where the body was, because no one wanted the answer. "How much?" I asked. "It doesn't matter how much." "How much, Solange?" She finally looked at me. Small eyes, streaked with red. "Enough that the house is no longer the currency," she said. "You are." The sewing box nearly slid off my lap. I pressed the lid against my belly. I felt the needle case rattling inside like a little heart of metal. "You're selling me. I'm paying with you," she corrected, as if the word were less filthy, in exchange for the debt. "Mom," Sonia began, in a low voice. "Shut up, Sonia." Fernanda uncrossed her arms. She came over to me in that way of hers. Slow walk, soft smile, poison on the tip of her tongue. She tucked a lock of my hair behind my ear with a fake gentleness. "Don't cry," she said. "And you always said you wanted to get out of here. Not like this." "How, then?" "Sewing." I swallowed the answer. I had already learned that with Fernanda, every answer became ammunition. I looked at the window. It was late afternoon. The October light fell over the linoleum of the room in long, dirty stripes. Somewhere near the harbor, a ship's horn blew. "When?" I asked. "Now," Solange said. "He sent a car." I looked at the front door as if I had just realized a door existed. It did. It always had. I just never had anywhere to go on the other side of it. I went up to the room I shared with Sonia to gather my things. I took little, 2 changes of clothes, the Bible that had been my father's, a black and white photograph of my mother leaning against an apple tree, and the sewing box. The box closed with a dented brass latch. The brass had a deep scratch where my father, years ago, had slipped with the screwdriver. I looked at that scratch the way you look at a face. Sonia came in after me. She stood by the door. I saw that she wanted to say something. I saw that she couldn't. "Everything's fine," I lied, without looking at her. "Bibiana, everything's fine." When I came down, Bruno was in the doorway. That was the first name of his I learned. Bruno. In that moment, he was just a big man, in a well-cut dark suit, hands crossed in front of his body, eyes that didn't rest on anything for more than a second. "Ma'am," he said, and the word fell strangely on me. No one had ever called me that. "Bibiana, Miss Bibiana." He opened the car door and held it open. "Please." I looked back once. Solange had already disappeared into the kitchen. Fernanda was still in the doorway, and when our eyes met, she blew me a little kiss with the tips of her fingers. Sonia was crying against the stair railing. I wanted to hug Sonia. I didn't. If I touched her, I would fall apart, and I had sworn, since I was 8 years old, that I would never fall apart in front of that house. I got into the car. Bruno closed the door carefully, the way you close the door of a room where someone is sleeping. He went around. He sat behind the wheel. The engine started silently. We drove off. Boston passed by the window in layers. First the narrow streets of our neighborhood, with clotheslines crossing between the buildings and children running on the cold asphalt. Then the wide avenue, the signs of the Italian bakeries, the steam rising from the ventilation grates. Then the north end in the distance, to my right, and I thought, without wanting to think it, that somewhere in those alleys lived the most dangerous man in his city. I crossed my hands in my lap. I kept sewing in my mind. The hem of my gray dress had 29 stitches per span. I counted everyone. "Will you eat on the way, ma'am?" Bruno asked, without turning his head. "There's bread up front." "No, thank you." "There's water." "No, thank you." He nodded as if that made perfect sense. He kept driving. I noticed his shoulders barely moved. I noticed he checked the rearview mirror every 12 seconds. I counted. That's what my hands did when they had no thread. They counted. The neighborhood changed. The streets grew wider. The facades, taller, old trees, with red leaves slowly letting go. The car turned into a lane closed off by a tall wrought iron gate with the initial S worked into the top. The gate opened without anyone touching it. The gravel crunched under the tires. I saw the house. It wasn't a mansion out of a movie. It was an old townhouse of reddish brick, 3 stories, iron balconies painted black, ivy climbing up one of the sides. It had a quiet charm that bothered me. I wanted to hate that place. It was easier to hate white marble in cold light. This looked like a home. Bruno parked. He came to open the door for me. He held out his hand. I didn't take it. I got out on my own. The sewing box hugged against my chest. "This way, ma'am." We climbed the 3 steps to the entrance. A dark wooden door, heavy, with the same initial S in a small metal detail. Bruno pushed the door open. The hall was spacious, with dark parquet floors and a low chandelier of matte bronze. It smelled of waxed wood and something warm, maybe cinnamon coming from some room in the back. It didn't smell of blood. It didn't smell of fear. I had braced my nose for both. He was halfway down the stairs. Costantino Saviano came down without hurry, one hand sliding along the wooden banister, the other in the pocket of his slacks. He was tall, taller than I had imagined. Dark hair, combed back carelessly, as if he'd run his fingers through it once and given up. Black shirt, no tie, 2 buttons open at the collar, sleeves rolled up below the elbow. The skin of his forearm was pale and marked by a thick scar at the level of his left wrist, which I pretended not to see and saw. His eyes found me on the last step and stayed on me. They didn't travel down my body. They stayed on my face. That bothered me more than if they had gone down. "Bruno," he said, and his voice was low, polished, and cut like tempered glass. "Thank you, Dawn." Bruno took a step back. Costantino finished coming down and stopped 3 paces from me. He didn't hold out his hand. He didn't come closer. He just looked at me from the distance where he was, and the whole house went quiet, in a way that raised gooseflesh on my shoulders. "Bibiana Manzoni," he said, with no rise of a question. "Yes, you know why you're here." "I do." He nodded slowly. I waited for the words I had prepared my whole life to hear. I waited for the hand on my arm, the shove toward the stairs, anything that would confirm the story Boston told about him. None of that came. "Your room is on the 2nd floor, 2nd door on the right," he said. "Your meal comes up in an hour. The door has a lock on the inside. Use it if you want." I blinked. I think I blinked twice. "Sir, Costantino. Costantino, go up." The word wasn't shouted. It was placed in the air like a final instruction. I found myself going up before I decided to. My legs obeyed. The sewing box knocked against my belly with each step. Halfway up the stairs, I stopped and looked down. He was still in the same place, in the center of the hall, hands in his pockets. He was looking at me. "You're not going to—" I began. "No, not what?" He tilted his head slightly, as if considering whether it was worth answering. "Whatever you think I'm going to do to you," he said, quietly. "I'm not going to." I couldn't answer. I went up. The room was large, a 4-poster bed of dark wood, a thick wine-red rug, a desk by the window with a notebook and a pen left forgotten on top, as if someone had arranged the space for a real guest. The curtains were open. Outside, Night fell fast in that part of the city, and the streetlights began to come on one by one. I closed the door. I didn't lock it. I pulled it to. I set the sewing box at the foot of the bed. I set the Bible on top of the nightstand. My mother's photograph stood propped against the lamp on the desk. She looked at me from far away, leaning against the apple tree with her hand on her belly. I had never noticed before that she had her hand on her belly. The meal came up. A maid of about 60, in a white apron, no smile and no look of pity. Just left the tray on the desk and said goodnight. I didn't eat. I sat on the edge of the bed. I put the sewing box in my lap again, opened it, took out the needle, threaded it. There was nothing to sew. I sewed the air. The night passed that way, me sitting, dressed, with the light on. The old clock in the hallway struck the hours with a muffled sound that reminded me of the church where my mother had me baptized. 1 chime, 2, 3. On the 4th chime, I finally turned off the light. Not because I had decided to sleep, but because the light was starting to hurt behind my eyes. I stayed in the dark with my hands on the closed box. I heard the wind beat against the window pane. I heard a water pipe somewhere on the floor below. I heard my own breath going in and out at the wrong height in my chest. That was when I noticed the gap. Between the door and the floor, there was a small space, about 2 fingers wide, through which a thin strip of light came in from the hallway. I had been staring at that strip for hours without realizing it, and realizing it now was like getting a slow punch. The strip of light was cut off by a shadow, a still shadow. It didn't move on. It didn't stir. It didn't retreat. I got up without making a sound. I crossed the rug without breathing. I pressed my ear to the door. On the other side, in the hallway, I heard no footsteps. I heard no breathing, but the light stayed cut off, on both sides, exactly the width of a man standing. I went back slowly to the bed. I sat. I looked at the gap. The shadow stayed there all night. Chapter 2. The Monster Feeds Cats. I woke up without having slept. The gray light of morning came in stripes through the half-open curtain, and the first thing I did was look at the gap under the door. The strip of light from the hallway was whole again. The shadow had gone away at some point between the 5th chime and the first bird song. I hadn't heard it leave. I hadn't heard it arrive. Maybe he had never needed to walk in order to stand outside. I lay there a few more minutes with the blank ceiling above me. There was a damp stain in the corner, near the molding, and I studied it as if it had something to teach me. It didn't. I washed my face in the basin on the counter, the cold water biting the skin of my cheeks, and I changed the gray dress for another gray one, cleaner. I combed my hair with my fingers. There was no mirror in the room. I had noticed that the night before and had decided not to think about it. I thought about it again, this time, and then I stopped. I went down the stairs with my hand sliding along the banister the same way I had seen Costantino do, and for a moment I felt ridiculous. I let go of the banister halfway down. The house was awake and silent at the same time. Somewhere on the floor below, a clock ticked, heavy and steady like a breath. Somewhere outside, a dog barked in the distance, the sound arriving muffled through the thick walls. There were no voices. There were no footsteps. I stepped onto the parquet carefully, like someone who wanders into a sacred place by mistake and doesn't know if they'll be forgiven. The kitchen was at the back of the hall, to the left. I didn't know that, but the smell guided me. Coffee brewed not long ago, warm bread, something citrusy, maybe orange, with a sweet undertone I recognized as heated honey. I pushed the swinging door. The table in the middle of the kitchen was set for one, a white cup with a gilt rim, a saucer with slices of dark bread, a jar of amber glass honey, a small plate with thin slices of orange arranged in a fan. The coffee pot was on the stove, on low heat, and the steam rising from it was narrow and quiet. There was no one there. I stood in the doorway, not knowing if I was allowed in. There was no note. There were no instructions. I had lived my whole life in a house where the food was served with a reminder of what it had cost and who would owe for it. Here it was just a table, a cup, an orange sliced with the care of someone who has time for it. "You can eat, ma'am." The voice came from behind me. Bruno had appeared without a sound, his dark heelless shoes, the calm expression of a man who has never been caught off guard in his life. I jumped. He made a small gesture with his hand, in apology. "I don't eat much," I answered, without looking at him, pride rising up my throat before I could control it. "They won't charge me for what's left over," Bruno said, serious. "I'm the one who eats it." I looked at him out of the corner of my eye. He wasn't smiling, but there was something quiet at the corner of his mouth that told me that was humor. I hadn't laughed in who knows how long. I didn't laugh now either, but I sat down. I ate little. The bread was dense and good, with a crust that crackled between my fingers. The coffee was strong, a little bitter, the way I liked it and had never asked for. The orange was cut to exactly the measure of people who know what they're doing when they cut an orange. Bruno stood leaning against the counter, stirring a cup of his own. He drank his coffee in silence. When he finished, he washed the cup himself in the sink. I noticed that. I didn't expect to notice. "The Don doesn't come down for breakfast," Bruno said, without my having asked. "He's already eaten." "He eats?" Bruno turned his head 0.5 millimeter in my direction. He considered the question with a seriousness that didn't seem ironic. Sometimes. It was the first piece of information about Costantino Saviano that I received without having to pay for it. I kept it. The day passed strangely. I was expecting orders. None came. I tried to lock myself in the room. I came out after an hour because the silence of the room was worse than the silence of the house, more closed, more without a way out. I walked along the second-floor hallway, slowly, with my hands crossed in front. All the doors were closed, and the hallway smelled of old wood and something I could only call accumulated time. I didn't open any door. I wasn't a fool. I found the library by accident, on the floor below, at the end of a hallway narrower than the rest of the house. The door was ajar, as if there were nothing there that needed guarding. I pushed it with my fingertips. Shelves from floor to ceiling, in dark wood, the books with no apparent order, but no carelessness either. A worn leather armchair near the cold fireplace. A desk lamp lit, though no one was there. On the desk, a book left open face down, marking the page. I stood in the doorway. I didn't go in. I just looked, the way you look at a thing that belongs to someone who could come back at any moment. The house was the kind that seemed to breathe when no one was watching. Dinner came up to my room on a tray, brought by a middle-aged woman I wasn't introduced to, and who didn't tell me her name. She set down the tray, nodded, left. I ate half. I pushed the other half aside. The hallway clock struck 8. It struck 9. It struck 10 down, and each strike grew a little heavier than the last. I couldn't stay lying down. I lit the lamp, took the sewing box, opened it. There was an old pillowcase I had brought in the rush, and I sewed the inside of it just to have something in my hands, my fingers moving in the dark from memory. Around 11, I got up to drink water. The pitcher was empty. I went out into the hallway. That was when I saw him. Costantino was leaning against the hallway wall, next to my door, his shoulders touching the wooden molding. His head was down, his chin almost on his chest, his eyes open, fixed on the baseboard across the hall, as if he were reading something written there that only he could see. His arms crossed over his chest, his shirt creased in front, his sleeves rolled below the elbow, as if he had planned to do something that night and given up halfway. The scar on his left wrist appeared again under the fold of his sleeve, a pale line that the hallway's dim light lengthened. When he saw me, he didn't startle. He didn't apologize. He didn't invent an excuse. He just straightened slowly, pulled his shoulders from the wall with a calm that must have taken years to cultivate, and looked at me as if I had caught him at something he already knew I'd catch sooner or later. "You're not sleeping," he said, quietly. "Neither are you." He looked at the floor. It was a half smile I saw and didn't see. It vanished before I could be sure it had existed. "There's a pitcher in the kitchen," he said. "I'll take you." He didn't offer me his hand. He just started walking. I followed. His footsteps made no sound, and he walked like someone who knows every board that creaks and avoids them all. We went down the stairs. He didn't turn on the light. The light in the hall came only from the low chandelier, left at half glow, and from the reflection of the moon on the parquet, a cold shine that warmed nothing. In the kitchen, he filled the pitcher at the sink. The sound of the water was too loud inside the silence of the house. He didn't hand it to me. He set it on the counter, beside me. "Thank you," I said. "Bibiana." It was the first time he said my name. It caught me in the middle of my breastbone and lodged there, like a small pressure that didn't hurt, but that I knew would take a while to fade. I didn't lift my face. "Costantino, go back to your room. Are you going back to the hallway?" He took his time. The silence of the kitchen was different from the rest of the house, closer, as if the walls were smaller. I held the pitcher with both hands to stop the little tremble I didn't even know I had. "I'm going to the library," he said, finally. I accepted that as an answer. I left the kitchen with the pitcher, but instead of going up, I turned left in the hall and went after him. I don't know why. I do. It was pride. I didn't want to be the bought woman who goes up the stairs when the man tells her to go up. I had already been that woman once that day. The library was as I had seen it in the afternoon. The lamp lit, casting a golden circle over the desk, the book face down, the empty leather armchair with the imprint of someone who usually sat there. Costantino was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, looking at the dark garden outside. The dry stalks of the winter shrubs drew themselves against the glass like lines of India ink. He didn't turn when I came in. He waited. "Do you stay awake all night?" I asked. "I do." "Why?" "Because sleep cost me dearly once." He turned his head half a centimeter. I saw his profile against the window pane, the firm line of his jaw, the straight nose, the shadow of his lowered lashes against his cheekbone. I didn't see his eyes. "You shouldn't be here, ma'am," he said. "I know. I didn't mean the room. I know." The silence that came after was full, the kind that warmed slowly, like covered embers. I felt the heat rise up the back of my neck and go down through my shoulders. I set the picture on the library desk, because my hands really started to tremble, and I needed to let go of the picture before I let go of myself. "Good night, Costantino," I said. "Good night, Bibiana." I left, but I didn't go to my room. I stopped at the end of the kitchen hallway, near the back door, and waited. I wanted to know if he would go up. I wanted to know why I wanted to know. He didn't go up. I heard the glass back door open slowly, a soft sound of a rubber stopper, and the night air came in for a second before the door closed again. I leaned against the wall and looked through the kitchen doorway. The most feared man in Boston was crouched on the back porch, an enameled blue bowl in his hands. Around him, 3 stray cats, 1 black, 2 tabbies, their fur bristling from the cold. They ate with the urgency of those who aren't sure they'll eat again. The black one pressed its head against his knee as soon as it finished, its furry chin resting on his dark trousers. Costantino laid a hand on the back of the animal's neck. He didn't pet it. He just rested it there, with a stillness that seemed to come before any learned gesture, as if he were using the animal as an anchor. The other cat climbed onto his thigh. He didn't take it off. I stayed there. How long I stayed there, I don't know. Long enough to feel the cold of the hallway take me by the ankles. Long enough to forget the picture on the library desk. Long enough to feel something old and rusted move inside me without permission, opening with the sound that rust makes. I went back up the stairs in the dark. I almost locked the door of the room. I left it pulled to. I sat on the edge of the bed, the sewing box in my lap, the old pillowcase forgotten beside me on the mattress. I looked at the photograph of my mother on the desk, her face cut out by the single thread of light that came in through the curtain. "Mama," I murmured, and I didn't even know why I said it. The word monster had lived in my mouth all night. I had repeated it in thought to keep myself alert, a small and necessary mantra. A monster bought me. A monster brought me here. A monster has a scar on his wrist and doesn't sleep. Monster is the way to name a man you need to hate in order to survive. I tried to say the word again, inside my head. It wouldn't come. Another name came out in its place, and that name was worse, because it was a man's name. Chapter 3. The Torn Coat. 3 weeks inside that house, and I already knew by heart the way from my door to the kitchen, from the kitchen to the library, from the library to the back porch where the cats waited for the man no one else waited for. Sewing was the only thing that reminded me who I was. I asked Bruno for a basket in the first week, and he showed up the next day with fabrics wrapped in brown paper, needles in a metal case, a new pair of scissors with a dark handle. I didn't ask where it came from. Bruno didn't answer what I didn't ask. It was a silent agreement between the two of us, and it worked. That mid-November morning, I was sitting near the window of my room, mending the hem of a skirt of mine that didn't need mending, just to have something to do with my hands, when I heard a familiar voice in the hallway below. "Cosima, where's my girl?" "I know she's here. Don't try to push me around, boy. I've wrapped bigger men than you in gift paper." I got up so fast I dropped the spool on the floor. Cosima was the oldest seamstress in the Italian neighborhood, widowed 3 times, sharp-tongued, hands still steady. She had taught me to sew when I was a child, and my father was still alive. I hadn't seen her since I entered that house. I came down the steps holding the hem of my dress like someone holding their heart. Bruno was standing at the foot of the stairs, arms crossed. A half-smile caught at the corner of his mouth that was the closest to a laugh he allowed in public. Cosima, short, round, a dark scarf tied over her hair, held a cloth bag against her chest. "Bibiana," she said, and her voice trembled once before hardening again. "I came to bring you buttons, and to see if these people here feed you." "They do, Cosima." She measured me from head to toe, narrowed her eyes. "You're thin." I'm in one piece. That's the least of it. She turned her chin toward Bruno. You. Coffee? From the kitchen. For two. Bruno raised an eyebrow. It was the most expressive thing I'd seen from that man in 3 weeks. Ma'am, I'm not. You're whatever I say you are as long as you're in front of me. Coffee. 2 cups. Real sugar. Not that white powder you rich people call sugar. I covered my mouth with my hand. Cosima turned to me and frowned as if I had committed a grave crime. What are you laughing at, girl? Nothing, Cosima. You're laughing at me. I'm laughing because it's been 3 weeks since I laughed. She softened in a way no one saw from the outside. She took my hand, turned the palm up, ran her thumb over my fingertips as if counting each needle callus. At least your hands are still yours, she said quietly. Good girl. Don't let anyone take that from you. We went up to my room. She sat in the chair by the window, put the bag in her lap, started taking things out. 3 cards of buttons, a wine-colored satin ribbon, a ball of gray thread that she said would do me good, for a man who wears too much gray and doesn't know it. I laughed again. It hurt to laugh. It was a good hurt. That man there, she said, in a whisper that wasn't a whisper of fear. It was the whisper of someone who's seen it all. Did he hurt you? No. You're not lying. I'm not. She looked at me for a long time. Then she shook her head, slowly. There are things worse than being beaten, girl. There are men who look at a woman as if she were a thing they're afraid of breaking. That's the worst kind. Because we believe them. I didn't answer. I didn't know what to answer. Cosima stayed another hour, argued with Bruno about the coffee, kissed my forehead twice before leaving, and when she walked out the front door of the townhouse, I stood at the window and watched her silhouette cross the gate with her back straight, as if that street belonged to her. That afternoon, I went down to the library after some thread I had forgotten in the morning room. The hallway was empty. I had already learned to walk through that house without making a sound. It was in the hallway outside the library that it happened. A man I didn't know came from the other side. Tall, dark jacket, the smell of cigarettes clinging to him. A captain or under-captain of some business at the harbor. I didn't know. It didn't matter. He stopped in the middle of the hallway and looked at me in a way that cut the air. "The boss's new one," he said, and his mouth twisted into a slow smile. "I thought you'd be prettier." I didn't answer. I gripped the sewing scissors in the pocket of my dress and kept walking. He didn't get out of the way. He stayed put, blocking the hallway, too tall for me to pass without touching him. "Plain," he went on. "Otherwise I'd understand what he keeps." "Excuse me," I said, my voice so low it hurt to get out. "Ask nicely." I was about to open my mouth when I heard the library door open behind me. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. The air changed. The shoulders of the man in front of me changed first. "Get your feet out of the hallway of my house." Costantino's voice was the same as always. Low, polished, unhurried. That was why it hurt more to hear. The man in the jacket went pale in a way I had never seen an adult go pale. He took a step back. He tried to laugh. Boss, I was just... Bruno will see you to the door. Don't come back." That was all. 1 sentence. Costantino didn't even move from where he stood, 1 step behind me, and the man turned his back and left down the hallway without looking at either of us. Bruno appeared at the end of the hallway as if he had been there the whole time, and maybe he had, and went after him. I stayed put. Costantino's hand didn't touch me, but I felt his warmth right near the back of my neck, too near for a man who always kept his distance. "You're all right," he said, and it wasn't a question. It was a statement. "I am. Good." He passed by me toward the stairs without saying anything else. I stayed in the hallway with the scissors still gripped in my pocket, and my heart beating in a place that was no longer fear. I went into the library to get the thread. That was when I saw it. It was thrown over the arm of one of the leather armchairs, near the fireplace. A dark coat, long, of heavy wool. His coat. The left sleeve had a tear at the elbow, deep, with a piece of the lining sticking out. It must have caught on something. It must have caught on something that wasn't a nail. I stared at the coat for a length of time I couldn't measure. Then I sat in the armchair. I took the needle from the hem of my dress, took the ball of gray thread Cosima had brought, the man who wears too much gray and doesn't know it, and started to mend. I didn't think. When I thought too much, it hurt. Sewing was a place where the pain didn't reach. I worked slowly, stitch by stitch, joining the fabric carefully so that the scar of the seam would be thin, almost invisible on the inside. I didn't notice when the sun changed places in the window. I didn't notice when the footsteps stopped at the door. When I looked up, he was standing there, Costantino, leaning against the frame. No coat over his shoulders, white sleeves rolled to the elbow, the scar on his left wrist showing on a thin strip of skin I tried not to look at twice. He said nothing. He was watching my hands. I said nothing either. I kept sewing. The needle went in and out of the wool with a small, rhythmic sound, like a breathing that was neither mine nor his. When I finished the last stitch, I knotted it on the inside, bit the thread the way my mother taught me when I was 7, and held out the coat in my lap, my palm open over the mend. "There," I said. He didn't move from the door. He took his time. Then he came into the library slowly, stopped in front of the armchair, and took the coat from my hand like someone taking a fragile thing. He looked at the mend. He ran his thumb over it. "Why?" he asked, quietly. I could have said a lot. That it was a habit of mine. That my hands needed to do something. That no one in that house knew how to sew. I said the only thing that was true. It was torn. He looked at me. It was the first time I saw his eyes without the glass over them. For a second, something in them lay uncovered, and I looked away because I wasn't ready to see what it was. Costantino left the library with the coat folded over his arm, without saying anything else. The door stayed open behind him. I sat there with the needle in my lap, and it was in that silence, in that armchair, that I understood, without yet having a word for it, that something had broken between the two of us. Not with violence, not with words, with a mend. Later, I went down again. I had forgotten the thread. Again, and I hadn't forgotten the thread. I wanted to go down. The stairs of the townhouse were wide, with a dark wooden banister, waxed steps that caught the light of the chandelier. On the 5th step from the top, the heel of my old flat caught on the hem of my dress. I pitched forward. I didn't fall. I felt his hand first on my wrist, then his arm at my elbow, then his weight pulling my weight back. Costantino was coming up the stairs at that very moment. I don't know if it was luck. I didn't believe in luck at that moment. He caught me on the landing between the steps. Close. Closer than he needed to. His hand on my wrist. Firm. Without squeezing. I caught his scent. The same as always. Clean soap, and a note of tobacco that didn't come from him. Came from the rooms where he walked. His breathing was controlled. Mine was not. He looked at my mouth. It was quick, but I saw it. And then he let go of my wrist as if it burned. "Learn to walk in heels, Bibiana," he said, and his voice came out sharper than it needed to. "Or take off the heels." He climbed the rest of the stairs without looking back. I stayed on the landing. My hand closed over the wrist where his hand had been, and I breathed until I could go down the next step without trembling. That night, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't even lie down. Around 2 a.m, I gave up, put on my robe, opened the door of the room. The strip of light in the hallway was without a shadow this time. He wasn't there. I walked down the hallway barefoot, went down the stairs carefully, without heels now, and found a light on in the sitting room near the fireplace. Costantino was seated in one of the armchairs. No coat, a glass in his hand, the low fire licking the logs. He saw me come in and didn't get up. He pointed with his chin to the armchair across from him. I sat. The fire crackled. "You don't sleep," I said, after a long while. No. Since when?" He turned the glass in his hand. The firelight passed through the glass, passed over his left wrist, passed over the pale line of the scar that ran from the bone until it disappeared inside the sleeve. Since one night. A specific night. One. I didn't ask which. He wasn't going to say, and I wasn't going to force it. We stayed in silence a while longer. I knew, somehow, that it was my turn to stay quiet, and his turn to decide whether he spoke. "There are things you swear when you're young," he said, quietly, and his eyes were on the fire, not on me. "You swear without really understanding the size of it." I swore something. What? To never love anyone. The sentence hung in the air of the room. The fire crackled again. I gripped my robe in my lap to have something to hold. Why? Because loving a person, in my world, is pointing a gun at them that I can't deflect. He took a sip. It's handing over a target. He looked at me for the first time since he'd started speaking. It's killing that person slowly, without knowing it. I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice. He turned his eyes back to the fire. I stayed looking at his wrist, the scar that appeared and disappeared as the flame rose. I didn't ask. I knew, without having a word for it, that there, in that line of paler skin, was buried the first woman he had loved. He didn't tell me to go up. I didn't go up. We both stayed there, by the fireplace, until the fire turned to embers, without saying anything else, and it was the most silent and the fullest night of my life. Chapter 4. Storm and Retreat. The storm arrived in mid-December, the way things you don't invite arrive. In the morning, the sky was leaden gray. At noon, it began to rain. And in the late afternoon, the wind came in under the windows of the townhouse with a sound like people crying. The wood of the windows swelled against the hinges. The smell of wet rain had come in through the hallways and stayed there, heavy and cold, mixed with the smell of firewood rising from the fireplace downstairs. I was in the library with a basket of scraps in my lap when Cosima appeared in the hallway with her wet coat and the cloth bag pressed against her chest. Bruno was behind her carrying her umbrella as if it were a child, with the face of someone who couldn't understand how he had accepted that task. "I brought a message," Cosima said, before she even greeted me. "From the little one. From Sonia. From her. She came to the door of my workshop. She didn't say much. She just asked me to give it to you." Cosima took from the inner pocket of her coat a piece of paper folded 4 times, its edges slightly damp, where the rain had found a way in. I opened it slowly. Sonia's handwriting was small, round, still looked like a girl's writing. "I miss you. I'm sorry. 3 sentences, 1 word each. It was enough." Cosima didn't stay long. She had a client waiting. It was the end of the year, a party dress no one was going to wear to any party, and that had to be ready anyway. She kissed my temple, argued with Bruno about not getting in the way, and went out again into the rain. I heard her footsteps fading down the hallway, and then the door downstairs banging against the wind. I stayed with the paper in my hand. I sat in the armchair near the library fireplace, the same one where days earlier I had mended the coat. I looked at the paper. I looked at the fire. I looked at the paper again. The fireplace crackled softly, the orange and amber flames moving lazily over the oak logs. The heat reached my shin but couldn't rise any higher. The whole room had that cold of an old house in winter that settles into the corners and the stone walls and doesn't leave even with a fire. And I cried, not the way people cry out loud, the way people cry when they've spent weeks swallowing it, in silence, shoulders still, hands clenched in my lap, my face turned toward the fireplace so the fire could lick away the shame. Sonia had looked away in the living room of my old house on the day they shoved me into the car. I had kept that image like a stone. Now I had 3 sentences and the stone had cracked. I didn't hear Costantino come in. I heard him when he stopped. I raised my hand to wipe my face and didn't have time. He was there, standing 2 paces from the armchair, no coat, sleeves rolled to the elbow, his eyes on my face in a way that didn't let me hide anything. The glow of the flames fell on his left side and left the other side in shadow. And for a second, he looked exactly like what he was, a man who lived half in the light and half in the dark. "No," I said quietly, my voice too thin. Please." He said nothing. He sat in the armchair beside mine, slowly, like someone approaching a wounded animal. He didn't speak. He didn't ask. He waited. I turned my face the other way. The tears had a will of their own. I covered my face with my hand as if that would hide anything. He moved in the armchair, slowly, without hurry, and his hand came to mine. He didn't pull. He rested it there, like someone disarming a thing they're afraid of breaking. He took my hand away from my face, point by point, finger by finger, and held it. His palm was warm, rough, bigger than mine in a way I had to notice. "Look at me," he said. I couldn't. "Bibiana." His voice was low, brushing the deep. "Look." I looked. His eyes were open in a way I had never seen. No glass, no distance. There was the man who stood by my door all night, the man who had sent a captain away over a sentence in the hallway, the man who fed 3 stray cats at dawn because someone had to feed them, the same man I tried not to see during the day, so I wouldn't become dependent on something he wouldn't want to give me. He leaned forward slowly. I saw it coming. I had time to pull back, and I didn't pull back. His lips touched mine with a calm that didn't match the rest of him, the rigid shoulders, the jaw I could feel clenched even without touching, and I closed my eyes because my body decided for me before my head could vote against it. The kiss was short. It was enough. His mouth was warm, rough at the corner, controlled in a way I knew cost him control. When he pulled away, he stayed close, his forehead almost touching mine, breathing slowly, like someone who had just run without moving. "I shouldn't have done that," he said. "It wasn't to me. It was to himself." "You did," I whispered. "I did." He pulled away. He stood up. He walked to the library window, stood with his back to me, both hands braced on the frame, watching the rain beat against the glass. His shoulders rose and fell in a way that hurt to watch. Outside, the rain had thickened, and the threads of light from the street lamps were blurred by the wet glass. I stayed in the armchair. I didn't trust my legs to get out of there. Costantino didn't come near again that night. He left the library after a long while, without looking at me, and I heard his footsteps fading down the hallway until they vanished into the silence of the townhouse. I went up to my room alone. I lay down dressed, without even taking off my shoes. I slept little. When I slept, I dreamed of his scent. The next morning he was gone. Bruno said, with his usual discretion, that the boss had left early, business at the harbor, with no set time to return. I drank my coffee without seeing what was in the cup. I went up to my room, took the sewing basket, went back to the library out of stubbornness. I sewed with my back to the armchair where it had happened. The rain had stopped during the night. The sky was that clean gray of after a storm, washed and deep, and Boston breathed outside with the smell of wet earth and cold asphalt that rises from the sidewalk when the water is gone, but the cold stays. He came back in the afternoon. Bruno appeared at the library door with the straightest face he had. The boss asked you to come to his office. I left the embroidery in the basket. I got up. I went up the hallway that separated the library from his office with the hem of my dress between my fingers, counting my steps so I wouldn't think of anything other than my steps. I knocked on the door once. His voice came from the other side, low. "Come in." The office was a large room at the back of the second floor, with a tall leaded glass window that let in a cold, yellowish afternoon light, bookshelves to the ceiling, a heavy dark wooden desk in the middle. Costantino was standing behind the desk, hands braced on the top, not sitting. I had learned enough to know what it meant when a man doesn't sit. Close the door. I closed it. He looked at me. His eyes were closed off on the inside again, cold in the way that cost him. I saw the effort, and I saw too that he had decided it was going to cost him. "I thought about it all night," he said, "and all day, and I came to a decision." "All right, it's not all right." His voice came out rougher than he wanted. He breathed. He started again. "I'm going to get you out of here." Something inside my head dropped all at once. I said nothing because, if I did, I would break in a way he would see, and I couldn't give him that. "I have a house in Beacon Hill. Small, safe. Bruno will take you. You'll stay there until the end of winter. I'll send whatever you need. Fabric, thread, food, everything. You won't need for anything. Why? For safety. Whose safety? Yours." I looked at him. I really looked, with time and without hurry. His jaw was clenched. His fingers on the top of the desk were whiter at the tips. His eyes weren't lying. I knew how to recognize a lie in those eyes. I had spent weeks studying that face without admitting I was studying it. His eyes were doing the hardest work of his life, and I knew that too. And it hurt anyway. "You're sending me away," I said, calm. And I knew the calm was the cruelest thing I could offer at that moment, because it was the only thing he wouldn't be able to take apart. "I'm getting you out of the crosshairs. You're sending me away, Bibiana." "No," I said. "Don't say my name right now." He shut his mouth. I could have fought. I could have raised my voice. I could have said he was a coward, that he was calling safety what had another name, that he was doing to me exactly what my whole life had done to me, and that I thought, for one night, that he was different. I didn't. I had pride. Pride had been the only thing no one had managed to take from me. Not Solange, not Fernanda, not that house, not that man. I wasn't going to hand it over now. Tomorrow morning. "All right, Bibiana." "All right," I said. I turned my back. I opened the door. I left. I walked down the hallway without seeing the wall. I climbed the stairs with one hand on the cold iron railing. I went into my room. I closed the door without slamming it. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands open in my lap, looking at the faded Persian rug that lay between the bed and the window. I took the sewing basket from the floor and put it in my lap. I took out the needle. I took out the thread. I grabbed the first piece of fabric within reach, a scrap of bone-colored muslin I didn't even know what it would be for, and started to sew. I didn't see what I was sewing. The stitches came out crooked. I redid them. They came out crooked again. I redid them. It was the same motion I had made at 12 when my father got sick for the first time, at 15 when Solange said I was a burden, at 20 when I realized none of those women were going to change. Hands busy so as not to think. Hands busy so as not to cry. The hands that were the only part of me that always knew what to do. I sewed until the sun left the window. I sewed until the streetlights came on outside. That orange light of Boston's lampposts in winter that comes in through the shutters and streaks the floor with stripes. I sewed without crying, because I wasn't going to cry anymore over that man. I had decided on the stairs of his office that I wasn't going to cry over any man ever again. Bruno knocked on the door once near nightfall. He brought a tray with bread and cheese and a cup of tea that was already lukewarm. He said nothing. Neither did I. He understood and left. At some point after 10, I heard footsteps stop outside my door. I knew those footsteps. The shadow on the strip of light under the door cut it off. It stayed. He waited. I didn't get up. I stayed sitting on the edge of the bed with the scrap of muslin in my lap, and the needle still between my fingers, looking at the shadow of those feet on the strip of light, and I didn't get up. He stayed there for a length of time I couldn't measure. Then the footsteps went away slowly, without hurry, like someone who has nowhere to run to. I kept sewing. Across Boston. That same night, Fernanda crossed the living room of an apartment in the North End that she thought belonged to a lover. Red dress, new lipstick, her hair down the way she rehearsed in the mirror. She sat on the arm of an armchair, crossed her legs, and told the man she thought was a lover the weekly routine of the sister she hated, the schedule of the fabric market in the Italian neighborhood, the day Bruno went out alone with her, no captain behind, the narrow street they took as a shortcut, the blind corner before the butcher, the side of the sidewalk Bibiana always walked on because it was the shady side. The man listened to it all, glass in hand, slow smile. He was taking notes on the inside. He wasn't Fernanda's lover. He was Fortunato Fioravanti's messenger, and Fernanda, drunk on the desire to be bigger than she was, had no idea who she was handing her sister over to. Chapter 5, Almost Taken. The morning of the departure didn't come. I woke up dressed, the way I had slept, half sitting in the armchair by the window, the packed bag at my feet, the sewing abandoned in my lap. The snow was still falling outside, a damp gray that covered the townhouse garden and blurred the outline of the walls. I waited for the sound of Bruno's footsteps in the hallway, the polite knock at the door, the sentence that would come without ceremony. Time to go. It didn't come. I got up slowly, smoothed the dress with my palms, redid the bun without looking in the mirror. I left the room with the bag, took 3 steps into the hallway, and stopped. Bruno was leaning against the wall at the end of the rug, hands in his coat pockets, the face of someone who'd been there a while. "Good morning," he said, without moving. "You can set that bag down, ma'am. I thought we were leaving early." "We were." He scratched his temple with his thumb. "The Beacon Hill house sprang a burst pipe during the night, flooded the downstairs room knee-deep with water. There are 3 men there trying to figure out where it came from." I looked at him. I'm not naive. Pipes burst, but a pipe bursts on its own at exactly the right moment the boss wants. "Burst pipe," I repeated quietly. "Burst pipe," Bruno confirmed. His mouth trembled slightly at one corner. "These old Boston pipes, Miss Bibiana, they don't respect anyone's schedule." I dropped the bag on the hallway floor, not for the reason he thought. I dropped it because, if I kept holding it, I was going to laugh, and laughing that morning would have been worse than crying. "And what do?" I asked. "You eat." He pushed off from the wall. "I'll eat with you, if you'll let me." "The boss said to tell you the trip is postponed until later." "How much later?" "Later." That was the answer I was going to get. I went down with him to the kitchen, and the smell of coffee came before the stairs ended. Bruno let me eat in silence, stood leaning against the counter with his mug, and not once did he ask me how I had spent the night. It was the most delicate thing anyone had done for me in years. Costantino didn't appear. I spent the day between my room and the library, with the sewing in my hands, avoiding the part of the townhouse where I knew he would be. The house seemed quieter than usual, as if it too were waiting. In the afternoon, Bruno came back and said the trip was postponed for another 3 days. The pipe had only been the start of the problem. I only said I were all right, and he left without finishing his sentence. On the second day, I asked to go out. "And I need fabric," I said, still in the hallway. "I bought the last cut last week. If I'm going to Beacon Hill, I'd rather arrive with something in my hands." Bruno looked me up and down. He didn't see a woman. He saw a calculation. He weighed it. "Give me an hour to arrange it, ma'am." An hour. It was more. It was nearly 2. When we went down through the side gate, the sun was already low, slanting, in that way of a Boston winter afternoon that makes everything look older than it is. Bruno drove, and I held the small purse with the money Costantino had ordered left on the entryway sideboard. No note, no card. "Does the boss know I'm going out?" I asked, looking at the window. "The boss always knows. He didn't try to stop me. He doesn't stop you from anything." Bruno shifted gears. "And that's his problem." I didn't answer. I looked outside. We parked 2 streets from the fabric market of the Italian neighborhood. Bruno got out first, looked both ways like someone greeting a distant acquaintance, and only then opened my door. The narrow street smelled of bread and chimney smoke. The shop windows had that fine dust of late afternoon. I knew the place by heart. I had come there hundreds of times with Cosima, before they called me currency. We walked half a block, Bruno one step behind. I had already seen Mr. Fanucci's door when he stretched his arm across my chest. Without touching, "Stop." I stopped. 3 men closed off the street ahead of me. They weren't from the neighborhood. Their hands were where honest hands don't stay. The car came from the other side at a slow crawl, cut across at an angle, pulled up to the curb with the back door already opening. I saw it all in a single frame. I saw Bruno draw his gun. I saw the man on the right draw his first. I saw the sewing scissors at the bottom of my purse. "Run," Bruno said, quietly, without turning. "Through Fanucci's door. Now." I didn't run. I couldn't. My legs decided on their own. The first shot burst against a shop window behind me, and the sound made the whole world shrink by a size. Bruno moved in front of me like someone who had done it 100 times. 2 dry shots. 2 shapes fell, and the third was already on top of me before the noise finished ringing off the walls. I shoved my hand into the purse. The scissors opened in my palm as if they already knew. When the man grabbed me by the arm, I drove them in. I drove them into his shoulder with all the force my tired hands had stored up. He screamed, a high, surprised sound, more offended than hurt, and let go of me for half a second. That was all I needed. I stepped back, 1, 2, and hit my back against the iron gate of the bakery. The car sped up. The driver shouted something. The man with the scissors in his shoulder grabbed me again, this time by the hair, and I squeezed my eyes shut against the cold iron of the gate. I heard the second car before I saw it. It came too fast to belong to someone with an appointment. It braked sideways in the middle of the street, and the door opened before it stopped. Costantino got out alone. No captains, no button coat, his shirt collar open, and the gun already in his hand. He said nothing. The shot cracked near my ear. The hand in my hair went slack all at once, and the man's weight dropped down my back until it hit the ground. He fired again, into the air, at the driver of the first car, and the car took off without the passenger it had come to collect. He walked 3 paces toward me with a breathing I had never heard from him, short, high, of a man who had run on the inside. He stopped in front of me. He raised his hand, and for a second I thought he was going to touch my face. He didn't. He laid his open palm on the iron gate beside my head and stayed there, leaning, breathing too close. "And you're in one piece." It wasn't a question. It was him convincing himself. "I am." His eyes went down my arm, my wrist, the hand that still held the dirty scissors. He closed his fingers around mine, slowly, and disarmed the seamstress, as if he were disarming a man. "Good girl," he said, quietly. "Good girl." It was the first time I heard fear in his voice. Bruno appeared beside Costantino with the gun still out of the holster. There was blood on his sleeve. I don't know if his own. They exchanged 2 sentences I didn't hear. I was looking at the iron gate against the back of my neck, feeling its cold climb up my spine, only now realizing that my mouth tasted of copper. "To the car," Costantino said. I walked without feeling the ground. He walked pressed to my back, his hand between my shoulder blades and without pushing. I got into the passenger seat of his car, not Bruno's. Bruno understood without anyone saying it, and went to the other vehicle to collect what needed collecting. Costantino started the engine. He didn't pull out. He kept both hands on the wheel, looking at the street ahead, and breathed deeply 3 times before setting the car in motion. "I came alone," he said, quietly, to the windshield. "I didn't think. I just left. I know. I shouldn't have come alone. I know. Bibiana." I looked at him. His hands were trembling against the leather of the wheel. The man Boston prayed to before it ever saw couldn't stop the trembling in his own fingers. I reached out. I laid my hand over his. I said nothing. He kept my hand there for a whole block before letting go of the wheel to squeeze it back. We reached the townhouse with the sun already down. Costantino climbed the steps ahead of me. He said not a word to the men at the gate. He crossed the hall and said to Bruno, without turning, "The captain's room. Now, send for Miss Solange and Fernanda. Our car. No questions." "Yes, sir." I climbed 1 step of the stairs and stopped. "Costantino." He turned. His eyes were still strange. "Why my stepmother?" "Because what I'm going to say in front of the one who sold you." I swallowed. I went up. When I came down, they were all in the great room. The captain standing against the wall, Ottavio Cardano in the chair nearest the fireplace, Bruno at the door. Solange had come in holding her shawl with both hands. and Fernanda had come in behind her with that thin smile I had known my whole life, as if she still thought she was there to watch her sister take a beating. Costantino waited for me to come in. He closed the door with his foot. He didn't look at me. He spared me. Mr. Tucci, he said, without raising his voice. Read. Renato Tucci opened a folder. He read routines, market schedules, Bruno's route, the blind corner before the butcher, the messenger's name, the address where the messenger met the source, day, hour, red dress. Fernanda went white. Lies, she said, in a thread of a voice. It's lies. There's more, Costantino said. Bruno handed Renato a second paper. Renato read it in a low voice. It was the summary of what the messenger had confessed that same afternoon, after two captains caught him leaving the meeting in the North End. The name of the rival Don appeared at the foot of the page, written in the messenger's own hand, and Renato touched it with his index finger twice, without saying it aloud, so no one in the room would have any doubt. Fernanda looked at me. She thought she would find the look from before, the look of the silent sister, the seamstress who gripped her dress so as not to cry in front of others. She found something else. I held it. Bibiana, Solange began, shrill. Bibiana, tell the sir that this is the work of spiteful people. Ma'am, Costantino cut in, without raising his tone. One more word against your stepdaughter in this house, and you'll go out through the back door of the yard. Solange shut her mouth. Costantino turned to the captains, to Ottavio Cardano, to the whole room. Bibiana stays, he said, not as payment of a debt, not as a guest, not as anything you have permission to name without her permission. She stays because I chose it. And the next man who looks at her the way they looked at her today on the narrow street is going to find out that I can deliver the same message 3 times in a row. He paused. Take these two out of the townhouse. Today. Bruno stepped forward. Solange tried to start a sentence and stopped. Fernanda didn't look at me again. When the door closed behind them, the captains left in silence. Ottavio Cardano was the last to leave. He inclined his head to Costantino with that old respect of someone who still remembers his father, and looked at me in passing with eyes too attentive for a man who was only concerned. I didn't notice it then. I stood in the middle of the room. The fireplace crackled. Costantino stood near the great table, his back to me, both hands flat on the wood. I walked up behind him. I stopped a step away. You were going to send me away. He didn't turn right away. When he turned, his eyes were already wet without having cried, and I almost lost you because of it. It was the first time we looked at each other without disguise. Chapter 6. Winter Ends Whole. We went out to the back porch without arranging it. The night was clear, with that dry cold that tears at your breath before it reaches your lungs. Costantino opened the door for me, and the wind stirred the smoke of the neighbor's chimney against the dark sky. The 3 cats were there, thin, sitting on the stone step, as if they had always waited for him. Their posture had no urgency, only the quiet trust of those who know the bowl will be filled. He crouched and poured food into the clay bowl. The animals ate with the haste of those who never trusted the next night. The smallest one shoved the biggest with its muzzle. The biggest gave way without a fight. Costantino stayed crouched, his elbows on his knees, watching. His breath came out white in the cold air. He rushed nothing. He took a while to speak. One of the cats passed between his feet, indifferent, and Costantino followed the animal with his eyes before lowering his voice. It was my mother, he said, without looking at me. The one I lost. I sat on the step beside him. The stone was freezing through the fabric of my skirt. I didn't speak. I waited the way he had waited for me in the library, the night of the storm. I was 17. She was 40. She talked loud, laughed loud, cried in the kitchen when I came home late. My father was already who he was, but she went on being herself until the end. The enemies knew that if they wanted to get to him, it was through her. They took her. He rubbed his palm on his thigh, a mechanical gesture, of someone who had rehearsed that motion 1,000 times without noticing. I swore that week, to myself, for no one to hear, that I would never care about anyone out loud again. The wind blew softly at the edge of the porch. The neighbor's chimney let out a dense puff of burnt pine. Then you sat in the library and mended my coat as if I were just a man with a torn coat, and I went off to the office and spent half an hour looking at the wall without understanding what had happened inside my head. He paused. He swallowed something that stayed outside the words. I didn't understand it, he said, and that scared me more than anything I've ever seen. My father, I said, after a long silence. The man I cried for as a father. He raised me. It wasn't blood. It was bread on the table. It was a hand on my head. It was teaching me to sew when I couldn't hold the needle right, because my fingertips were still too soft. He died when I was 12. My stepmother waited for the funeral to end, to tell me that from then on I was a guest. He turned his face to me. The faint light of the lantern above the door fell on the left side of his face, and I saw his jaw clench. Bibiana, I spent my life waiting to be left, I said. The sentence came out without drama, just as a fact. I learned to leave first. The table, the room, the conversation. When you said you were going to send me to Beacon Hill, I thought, there it is. He learned my name just to say goodbye. I didn't learn your name for that. I know. Now, the cat's finished. The smallest one came to sniff the hem of my skirt, assessed me, decided I was harmless, and disappeared under the porch. The other two stayed still, their eyes shining in the dark like two pairs of dying embers. Costantino got up slowly, his knees cracking without his noticing. He held out his hand. I took it. We went back inside together. Bruno had turned off the lights in the hall and left only the landing light on, the yellow cone falling exactly over the first steps of the stairs, as if it had been calculated. The house seemed different in that light. It was the same wood, same smell of old wax and iron, same heavy silence of the thick walls, but it was different. We climbed the stairs slowly. He stopped on the landing, the same one where he had caught me by the wrist months earlier, and said a sentence I still carried. The memory was there, between the two of us, on that specific step, and we both knew it. He let go of my hand for a second, and looked at me the way a man looks when he's deciding his life in silence. He held it out again. I took it again. At the door of his room, he kissed me once. It was just one kiss, unhurried, without demand. His hand on my face fit as if it had learned the shape of it by heart, the thumb on my cheekbone, the other fingers behind my jaw, firm without squeezing. When he pulled away, I had understood. The door closed. The morning light came in through the thin window, winter white, and found me. I opened my eyes slowly. The room smelled of him, of wood, of leather, of something dry and clean I still had no name to call it. I turned my head on the pillow, and Costantino was sitting on the edge of the bed, dressed, barefoot, a steaming coffee balanced in his hand. He looked at me the way you look at an improbable thing you're afraid to scare off with a sudden movement. "You're up early," I said, my voice scratchy with sleep. I slept. I lifted my chin off the pillow. "You slept? 4 hours straight, without waking." He handed me the coffee with a gesture that hadn't learned to be gentle and was gentle anyway. I hadn't done that since I was 17. I sat up, adjusted the pillow behind my back, took the mug with both hands. The coffee was at exactly the point I like, and I didn't remember having told anyone in that house what the exact point I liked was. Darker than medium, less bitter than strong, no foam. I looked at him over the rim. "You asked Bruno," I asked. "When?" 3 weeks ago. I took a slow sip so as not to smile right away. The mug was warm in my palms, and there he was on the edge of the bed with his bare feet on the cold floor, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for a man who terrorizes Boston. He came closer, rested his forehead lightly against mine, and stayed there breathing the same air for a length of time that needed no words at all. His shirt sleeve slid down over his left wrist, covering the scar. He didn't see it. It was a gesture too old to depend on his attention. I reached out slowly, pulled the sleeve back up, folded it once at the elbow. He let me do it. "Don't hide it from me," I said. He didn't answer with words. He rested his mouth on my temple, and stayed there until the coffee went cold in my hand and I didn't care. The weeks that followed came with a quiet I didn't know existed in the houses of people like him. There was no ring, no promise spoken aloud, no name of mine on the iron gate. There was a place beside him at the breakfast table, the chair on the right, which Bruno started leaving pulled out without anyone asking, and there was the whole house coming to understand, without notice and without ceremony, that that place was mine. Ottavio Cardano was still around, cordial as always, the smile in the right place, the eyes that registered everything without giving anything back. I greeted him from a distance when we crossed paths in the hallway and went on to my side of the house, without thinking much about it. Bruno appeared in the kitchen one of those quiet mornings and stopped at the door watching Costantino eat bread without reading the newspaper, without looking at a clock, without getting up from his chair halfway through to attend to anyone. He stood there for 3 seconds, just to confirm what he was seeing. "The boss sleeps now," Bruno said, to the ceiling. "I'm going to have to find a new job." This one doesn't need me at night anymore. Shut up, Bruno, Costantino said, without lifting his eyes from the bread. Yes, sir. With all due respect. Bruno left with his dignity intact. I laughed for the first time in the townhouse loud enough to hear the echo bounce off the china on the shelf. Costantino looked at me from across the table. A long look, a little wary, like a man who isn't used to a beautiful noise. And what appeared on his mouth didn't quite become a smile, but it did become a man. In the afternoon, he found me in the library and said a small sentence, leaning against the threshold, like someone mentioning the weather. There's a room on the second floor facing east. It gets sun all morning. A 2-second pause. Comme you want it for sewing. It wasn't a question. It was an offer made in the only way he knew how to make it. I do, I said. It's yours. The first light of spring appeared one morning without warning, the way all the things do that we wait for without knowing we're waiting. I went up to the new room with a cut of blue linen folded over my arm and stopped at the door. The sun came in through the 3 wide windows in broad, clean stripes, crossing the light wood floor and reaching the back wall. A large table was already in the middle of the room, smooth top, no marks, of something that hasn't been worked yet but is ready. A sturdy chair with the straight back a seamstress needs. An antique dress form leaning against the side wall, carefully restored. I recognized the work of someone who had searched the right place in the whole city to bring that old wood back to life. I pulled the door to behind me. I walked slowly through the room, as if I needed to take the measure of each corner before believing it was mine. I ran my palm over the top of the table, over the back of the chair, over the rounded shoulder of the dress form. In the corner of the back wall, beneath the east window where the light fell most directly, was my mother's old trunk. Costantino had ordered it brought from the cramped Manzoni house without asking me. He knew I wouldn't be able to ask aloud for something that hurt me just to remember it existed. I sat on the floor in front of the trunk. The wood was warm from the sun that had been on it all morning. I laid my hand on the lid. It still smelled of dried rosemary and a light mildew, the way of everything kept by poor women in houses that had no room for anything beyond the necessary. I thought, lightly, without weight, that one day I would open it. Not that day. That day I had good light coming in through the 3 windows, blue linen waiting on the table, a sturdy chair, a restored dress form, and a man downstairs who had ordered my mother's trunk, brought without asking me because he understood, without needing an explanation, that some things you can't ask for. I got up from the floor. I ran my palm over the lid one last time, carefully, like someone making a promise. I left the workshop smiling. Costantino was in the hallway, not waiting, not exactly. He was standing at the level of my door, hands in his pockets, like a man who had come to look for something and found what he wanted before knowing what he was looking for. He raised his eyes when he saw me come out, without hiding that he had come to wait for me. You liked it. I did. He held out his hand. I took it. We went down the stairs together, slowly, the way of people who already know that every step there is theirs, and can take all the time they want. On the landing, he squeezed my hand a second longer than he needed to. The same landing, the same height, the same faint light from the hall fireplace downstairs. He said nothing. Neither did I need to. The house smelled of baked bread, of furniture wax, of spring beginning outside the window. I had no ring, no new surname, no promise made aloud before anyone. I had his stairs beneath my feet, and his hand inside mine, and a whole room upstairs with good sun for sewing, and a closed trunk waiting for the day when I was ready. On the inside, I was already whole.